So we're going to take a look now at the formal training that was undertaken at Post Office and Royal Mail by association with Raymond Grant. He used to work for Royal Mail, so had some of his training then, and then moved on to a role at the Post Office. Now, whilst it is in no doubt that there is much knowledge of the procedures and of his undoubted experience, which should hopefully bode well in terms of thorough investigations that he was involved with, there does seem to be some issues with nailing down actually the formal training aspect that was in place at the time at the Post Office. Let's jump into the inquiry.
When did you leave the Post Office?
It was somewhere early 2009.
So he's not worked for the Post Office for a while, so it could be that obviously his knowledge of this has faded over time. That would be understandable.
Do you hold any qualifications that are relevant to conducting criminal investigations into allegations of embezzlement, fraud, false accounting or theft?
When you say qualifications, I was in my early days as a Royal Mail investigator, I was assigned to Post Office Investigations branch.
I'm going to ask you about your experience in a moment and your training in a moment. At the moment, I'm just asking about formal qualifications.
I do not have any formal legal qualifications, no.
Which, in and of itself isn't shocking. I'm presuming that's why they had the criminal investigation team. But obviously he is so convinced of this person's guilt, which may be justified with the evidence that he's going to present. We'll have to analyse that when it comes along. But, to be making expert decisions on a case, you would presume that he's taking the lead from somebody with said legal qualifications rather than just off his own back.
But when you became an investigation manager employed by the Post Office Limited, what was your previous experience of conducting investigations? How long had you been doing that for Royal Mail Group before then?
I think it's around 5 years.
And can you help us as to roughly when you became an investigation manager for Post Office Limited?
I think that's probably around 5 years as well.
So about 2003-04?
Yeah, around that time, yes.
And when you were an investigation manager for Post Office Limited, where were you based?
I had an office in the Royal Mail Depot at Perth, 53 Fuse Road in Perth.
And was that for the entirety of the period?
Yes.
And was it an office-based job, i.e. that was your base to which you would return?
Yes, it was shared with the Royal Mail investigation team. We had the upper floor of a building in that yard.
And were you part of a Post Office Limited investigation team?
Yes.
So it just sounds like they shared the building rather than collaborated on investigations. Because I know people have been asking questions on the Royal Mail involvement in this, and it seems that there wasn't any, or it was arm's length at least, and that they didn't get directly involved, even though staff understandably moved between the Royal Mail and the Post Office over the years.
How many people were in the Post Office Limited investigation team at that time?
When I commenced?
Yes.
Based in Scotland?
Yes.
On the investigation side, I think it was 4 investigators and a team leader.
And the senior investigator, was he or she your line manager?
Yes.
And do you recall who that was?
In that short period of time of 5 years, I had 6 different line managers.
And were they based in Perth too?
No.
Where were they based?
One was based in Glasgow, the other 5 were south of the border in England.
Seems like a pretty high turnover, that, doesn't it? 6 line managers within 5 years.
When you were working for Post Office Limited, what did your role as an investigation manager consist of?
I was required to conduct any business which may be related to suspected criminal activity against Post Office Limited.
Investigations of the type we're going to look into,
yes.
Namely by alleged conduct by sub-postmasters involving the financial affairs of the post office that they were running. What proportion of your work involved that kind of investigation?
You're quite right. There were various other activities that we would do for external agencies who were committing fraud against the post office. But in real terms, I would suggest 65–70% of there was the kind of activity that we're going to be discussing in relation to audit shortages.
That seemed quite high. I mean, I think it would be interesting to compare what percentage of cases the investigation team, under the various guises that it's had over the years, had prior to Horizon. Because again, monitoring an organisational and company level, you would expect that a sudden spike, or indeed a sudden fall in the percentage of cases, could be attributable to something like a new system when it's brought in.
When you joined Post Office Limited, did you receive any initial training in the conduct of such investigations?
Yeah, well, I was carrying over 5 years' experience from Royal Mail. The laws were the same. The different aspect of it was instead of investigating crimes against Royal Mail, it was investigating crimes against Post Office Limited. So I had a very good mentor. It's a man called Peter Webb, who took me under his wing. He took me out on several inquiries before he allowed me to be a lead investigator. Yeah.
That was in Royal Mail Group?
No, sorry. This was in Post Office Limited.
So I think essentially what he's trying to say there is I didn't need additional training because I already had the necessary experience to undertake the role. He was obviously had some kind of supervisor before he took on the lead investigator role, so it sounds like good practice in that way, but they must have felt he was suitably qualified certainly to run these investigations, and it's clear that he feels the same way as well.
And so there was some on-the-job work shadowing, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Was there any formal training?
Yes, there was.
What was the formal training in Post Office Limited?
I went on Horizon training when it was introduced.
That must have been when you were in the Royal Mail Group investigation.
Oh, sorry, when I was introduced to it, I beg your pardon, that was a play on words there.
Okay.
It was when I was introduced to Post Office Limited, I was asked to go into a Crown office and work shadow some people in there.
How long did that training on the Horizon system last?
I think it was 2 to 3 days.
Right, so that was a bit longer than Robert Daly got the day he got, but it seems that the Horizon training overall is reasonably limited and seems to be the implication that it's related to the usage of Horizon, not so much on the audit side.
And what did the training consist of?
It was watching people serve and then watching how they balanced, what kind of reports the Horizon system could produce, and how to... if there was an anomaly at the end of the day where the balance was out, how to carry out the checks prior to any dockets or any counterfoils before they left the office, to carry out the investigation prior to any of that left the building, so that the counter clerk had to balance at the end of the day.
That was in a Crown office?
Yes.
And how many counters were there in that Crown office? Can you remember?
In Perth Crown office at that time, I think it was 7.
Did you receive any training about the work of or role of a sub-postmaster in a sub-office?
Yes. Mr. Webb was very good because he had some postmasters with whom he had associated himself with in the past, and he took me around and we visited a few post offices. He introduced me to the postmaster and we had conversations about what went on in that particular office. Because not every post office sold the same products. There were some specialist products that some post offices had that others did not.